Okay, good afternoon everybody and welcome to the Audit and Governance Committee on 20th February 2023. Just like to inform everyone that this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, which is a first for this committee. I'd like to move on to apologies for attendance. Just hand over to Fiona if you could report the apologies we've received.
Hello, we've had apologies from Councillors Kirk Harrison, Ian Jelly, Elliot Prentice and Russell Roberts.
Okay, thank you to that. I'd like to welcome a significant number of people here today. We've got a number of NNC officers, representation from both external auditors, some staff from Northamptonshire Children's Trust and the head of internal audit and risk from West Northamptonshire Council. So welcome all. Thank you for your attendance. It's really appreciated. Moving on to item 2, looking to members if there's any declarations of interest they'd like to make. No, thank you. And we'll move on to the minutes of the last meeting held on the 28th of November 2022. Are there any points of accuracy anybody would like to raise there? If not, I'll look for a proposer. Councillor Lavelle, thank you, and a seconder. Councillor Marks, if we go to the vote, all those in favour, please. Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, if we move on to agenda item 4, which is being presented initially by colleague Claire. It's the audit plan for 2020-21 for Corby Borough Council. Obviously, when this council started, we were presented with 6 outstanding audits from the 4 districts and boroughs, and also the Northamptonshire County Council one. For those that we're responsible for, this is the last one, so we just want to get this pushed over the line. I'll hand over to Claire, and then we'll probably bring in a colleague, I think Liz Jackson from EY. Claire initially, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report contains a copy of the audit plan for Corby Borough Council 2021 audit. In it, it sets out what audit is going to be undertaken and the parameters that are going to be used. I'll just draw your attention, obviously Liz will walk you through the report in more detail, but there is 2 new risks that have been identified for this financial year. One is the valuation around council dwellings, and the other one is in relation to treatment of COVID-19 grants within this financial year that we're referring to. So other than that, they're the only sort of particular items that I'd want to draw your attention to. I'll hand over to Liz, and welcome.
Thank you, through the chair. Thanks, Claire. So just for, obviously those, it's my first introduction to the North Northants Committee today. My name's Elizabeth Jackson. I'm a partner at EY. I've taken over from, some of you remember Neil Harris, who obviously used to come to this committee kind of with some of the other demising bodies. Since his departure, I've taken on Corby to close it out and sign it off for it. So this is our audit plan for the 2021 year. As Claire's already said, kind of linking through, I'm just going to take you through the exec summary. We have obviously the 2 fraud risks which were mandated for all public sector kind of and corporate audits. So there's no change to that assessment at all, and our procedures related to those will be the same. The significant risk on the valuation of investment properties, that's obviously because it's a highly complex, use experts, and actually then we use our own expert within the firm to kind of confirm that they are materially fairly stated. And then we've got valuation of council dwellings. And that risk is identified, and that's the first time we've had a significant risk around the council dwelling valuation, and that's because there's been a year-on-year increase of £46 million in the valuation of those properties, which we are currently challenging management and the external valuer on the valuation basis of those, because it was outside of my expectations, and I also don't think it should have increased by £46 million in the 2021 year with everything that was going on. Then the 3 other inherent risks, the 2, again, that are just standard from the previous year, valuation of other land and buildings, and I've split that out from the council dwellings and from the investment properties because I wanted the focus of that risk to be different. The risk profile on other land and buildings is less because they're an easier property to value, and therefore we don't need to do as enhanced procedures over those assets. we've got the new risk around the recognition of the grant income, and we're basically testing of Corby's accounting for it as a principal or agent relationship, and how have you accounted for it in the correct section of the CIS to ensure that your accounts are materially fairly stated. And then, as ever, there's always the pension fund liability, and that is, again, because it's highly complex, you use your actuary. We use EY Pensions Consulting to do our own piece of work to ensure that PwC and your own actuary, that it's reasonably in line with our expectations. Materiality has been set at 2%. We said there's nothing kind of outside in the wider world that would require me to decrease that 2% from kind of the upper level that it can be at. However, you'll notice on page 23 of the pack that tolerable error, which we set at a percentage of materiality based on the kind of the risk profile for the accounts, we have set that at 50%. So we either set it at 50% or 75%. In the previous year, it was at 75% for Corby, but when taken over, when reviewing the draft 2021 accounts, kind of looking at the level of error that was in the 1920 accounts, and obviously the work that was required to be undertaken against that set of accounts, I felt the risk profile needed to be reduced, that actually I wasn't satisfied with 75%. I felt the level of error that was expected in the Corby accounts was going to be quite high, and therefore the level of testing I wanted to do was increased on that basis. So we've reduced that to £559,000, which then means anything above that level in those accounts we will be looking at, we'll audit. We need back to the source evidence and that source documentation. And our audit differences, so what we call the SAD level, which is the level of error that I then report to you, is set at £55,000. And then I really just wanted to talk about the audit scope, but that's kind of the same as what Neil would have talked to you about in previous years. Actually, the audit is the same. We do a substantive audit. The work that we're required to do will be the same, just variance for the risk profile. And then the value for money conclusion. That we have one significant risk or risk of significant weakness, and that relates to the bank reconciliation process that was not 100% carried out through 2021, and therefore we've just got a risk around kind of the governance arrangements around that. There's nothing else that's been identified in our risk assessment to date, but we are still ongoing with it around Corby. Obviously recognising it's 2 years ago, and therefore kind of things have moved on in that arrangement anyway. And then the other thing I wanted to cover kind of in that executive summary, which you would have read in here, is the initial audit findings for 2021. So we started the accounts audit on the 9th of January 2023, so just over a month ago now. And the working papers and the kind of the draft set of accounts that came to us for audit were, we've written in here, were of a poor quality. And that just means that when we did the read-through of them, so me and my senior manager do a read-through of those accounts, and therefore we just identified whether there are any issues. And just from a quick read-through, we identified a number of casting and consistency where notes just didn't agree to primary statements and bits like that that came through, which is one of the reasons why I reduced that tolerable error down to the 50%. So from my perspective, just to kind of say today, we are working on the audit. We have had delays with management, and we're working with management. We recognise that obviously these accounts are effectively 2 years ago today, roughly, and therefore it is hard. You've got not many of the members of the finance team are the same people there. So when we're asking questions, we're asking for samples and bits. Actually, it's hard for them people to go and find it. But the audit is progressing very slowly. And I wanted to sit there and kind of say that today as I'm here in person, to say that we've had to remove the audit team for 2 separate weeks since the 9th of January, as we haven't had sufficient work for that team to be kind of utilised effectively and be productive. So we've diverted them to other audits. We will discuss later with management, and I've spoken briefly before the meeting to say actually we want to continue with the audit. I'm very aware that obviously delaying Corby further then impacts on North Northamptonshire as a council for delivery, and obviously getting on track and letting your new auditor then be able to do their audit that they need to do. But it's just to say that's where we are with the audit. That is kind of the risk profile that is attached to the Corby set of accounts as they currently stand. And we are struggling to do the audit as we would wish to do. I think that's probably there. Then if there's any questions on any of that.
Thank you for that update. And I know there's a question I'm going to go to from Councillor Lavelle, but Level. But first of all, I'd like to ask for the officers' comments, because what we've found in this history of the last 5 audits that your firm's been responsible for was it's not all one way. Some of the problems come from EY. We're not here to fix the blame. We're here to get the problem sorted. So I'd just like to get the perspective of Section 151 officer and yourself, Claire, on that. So we've got a rounded view, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and it is that issue, and I've briefly had a little bit of an email exchange with Elizabeth prior to coming to this meeting. It's really about the cumulative impact of some of all of this. It's not just this audit in itself. It's about the delays and the changes and the requirements of other audits that have pushed things back and back. So whilst this one, I won't disagree if there are issues that are coming up, absolutely, they need to be addressed and we should be responding effectively to that audit. But I would ask the external auditors to bear in mind that it isn't just this audit alone that has caused these issues that we are seeing in Northamptonshire. It's the cumulative impact of the previous audits to that. And as Elizabeth has recognised, it is at a period that was during COVID and therefore people working in different ways. So in terms of what we would perhaps expect for papers to be in certain places aren't necessarily where they were because people weren't where they were. And then we've got the issue that we've lost that organisational knowledge as well, all of which, whilst it's not saying that it makes anything excusable, it is a reason that does impact on our ability to provide some of this information in the timely manner and as perhaps as comprehensive as requested. What I have asked of the auditors, though, is obviously to make these requests reasonable and that we are looking for assurance it is a reasonable level of degree as well and that it's not being perhaps taken to the extreme. The other thing that we will need to consider is how things have been treated in previous years and that we remain consistent in that. And if we are moving away, there's a good reason why we're moving away because that, again, makes an impact on us as an authority to support that. So that's my main request from that, Chair, as I urged with Liz, is that we obviously do not wish to delay the audit because we want to get on and give Grant Thornton a set of opening balances and all the other things that they need in order that they continue the audit for Northants Council. And that's what we really want to do now. We want to get on as Northants Council and ensure now that Corby gets over the line and we get a set of accounts. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll just hand over to Claire, if you give us your perspective, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, unfortunately, we are in a position where the quality of the audit working papers aren't exactly as we would have liked them to be. We have taken steps to try to readdress that, but obviously it does put us on the back foot in some instances having to recreate working papers. So the team are fully dedicated. I've stepped away from what I would normally be doing as my day job and I'm stepping down into actually taking over the audit of Corby Borough Council. So whilst that was obviously an unforeseen issue, we are trying to deal with it and we are trying to put the resources in place to ensure that we can pick the speed up. But again, what we are finding, as I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate, is that individuals are no longer with us, people are no longer there, so trying to track down that information is being incredibly difficult on top of a year which was COVID, where things probably weren't done in the normal circumstances as well. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. Go to Councillor Level.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This committee will know that I spent the last 18 months directing my fire at Ernst & Young, no offence, Liz. And just by way of background, I'm a former auditor with PwC. But in the discussions that we've had, especially last year, I was assured, well, sorry, and not just me, we were assured as a committee that NNC was doing all it could to make sure that Ernst & Young were in a position to do their work, and I know that for one reason or another that didn't always happen. So it's disappointing. It's disappointing to read that the overall quality of the working papers is poor, and we have returned a large number of them because they do not reconcile with the draft accounts. Personally, I found that incredible to read because surely the last thing you would do before you hand anything over is check that they're reconciled to whatever it is they're supposed to reconcile to. It goes on. the accounts should have been subject to a quality review before submission to audit. Damn right. And we've heard the explanations from the officers, and I know there have been difficulties with staff moving on, but surely we could have got the basics right.
Okay, thank you for those comments. One thing that struck me is none of this was new to EY. The issues were known. I was expecting consistency between years, because we went through this same thing with the prior year, and I was expecting consistency with the other districts and boroughs, because the issues are all the same. They didn't happen in this year in isolation with this council, so it's nothing new in this sphere. And so everything's been ramped up in terms of risk, but it's all known things. It's things that we've dealt with before. So you're reducing your audit tolerance levels, and I find that difficult to understand, given, you know, we've been looking at the same things for the last couple of years, and it hasn't affected those. Could you give me your comments on that, please? Thank you.
Well, we set obviously materiality and tolerance levels every year based on kind of our risk profile and risk assessment. So for me, coming in new as your kind of lead partner for the Corby audit, when I looked at the level of error, and we do a kind of a calculation and determination based on what materiality should be and then what our tolerable error should be, and we have a number of criteria that we go through. And on it, you triggered as high risk on a number of those areas. And therefore, the only thing I could have done, and for my own professional opinion on signing my name on the bottom of those Corby accounts and audit report, is to reduce that risk level. And therefore it does create larger sample sizes, and that is difficult for the team, and I 100% accept that. But the audit approach is the audit approach, and our risk profile and our way of determining materiality and the risk profile and the tolerable error is set at there are a number of criteria we go through, and then that throws out what it needs to be, and then me as partner decides whether that is then acceptable to me. So I wouldn't feel comfortable, and I wouldn't sit here today, and I wouldn't be increasing that to 75%, would then be willing to put my name on the bottom of that audit report. And there is one issue that we're discussing on investment properties and surplus assets around the categorisation of those from 1920, but everything else so far, and Claire, correct me if I'm wrong, there is nothing else new that we're disagreeing with from last year's accounting treatment. It's just that, obviously, as we've moved another year on, it is difficult to find that source documentation. And for me to be able to sign my name with a clean, unqualified audit report requires us to have that source documentation. So we will be doing workarounds, and we will need more meetings. We meet once a week with Claire. We will need more meetings than that. So we will assess, so we know we can't get perfect documentation as I would need for every sample item and every piece of evidence that I need, but I need to be able to still sign a clean audit report. Because when I get quality reviewed, if I say, oh, actually, we all wanted to get it done, I accepted, we just took levels of evidence that wouldn't be appropriate on a different audit, I would then be failing my quality review.
Yeah, I'm still not clear on what's changed. What's changed from the prior year to this year, because we went through all these valuation issues with the prior year, and because your firm decided to change its partner, that shouldn't affect the service that we get.
So it's not changing your service, it was the level of errors that were in the 1920 Corby accounts. It was a high level and volume of errors in those accounts that then led to the risk profile being increased for 2021. So even if Neil had continued as your partner, he then also would have been required to reduce that tolerable error.
Okay, I understand that. The valuation side I'm surprised about, because we've gone through the valuation issue every time, on every year, with every council, and it's still coming back and saying this is the biggest problem we've got, I don't know how we're going to resolve this, we've got our valuers, you've got your valuers, and it's just putting in delays all the time, and it's, you know, there's two sides to the story I'm trying to get across, and you know, I understand your caution, but with it extending, audit risk increases over time. Is that, you know, that's a fact, it's not an opinion. The longer it goes on after the year end, the bigger the risk.
And that's a perfectly acceptable challenge. On the investment properties, it is because investment properties are hugely risky in valuation. There's lots of complex judgments that are taken into account on those. They would always be significant risk in any audit. If we were on time doing this in the perfect window of when you needed it to be, investment properties at EY is always a significant risk in any set of accounts if it's material, which it always is. The council dwellings is purely, so that usually would have been, I was about to say lumped in, but for a crude term, would have been with other land and buildings as a inherent risk. So that wouldn't have been a significant risk in 1920, but because we're thinking the valuation basis, the way that they've assessed the beacons, which is the way you value council dwellings, they have been changed by your valuer for 2021. So we, with management, aren't 100% sure yet why those beacons have changed and on what basis. We've asked questions in early January, actually December, when we looked at the accounts for the first time. We looked at them in December and asked the questions. So when we started in January, they were already asked of the valuer for them to respond to for day one of our audit. So we didn't have those delays, and we had sufficient time to be able to do the challenge we needed to meet your April committee for kind of doing the final audit report and signing off at the end of April. I don't think, we might have because I was on leave last week, so apologies of coming back in. We still don't have a written down judgment valuation why the beacons have changed, on what basis, so then we can do our audit work. So I fully accept the point, but at the minute they've changed by 48 odd million pound, and I have no understanding why that's changed. And when you look at my materiality being £1 million, I'm never going to accept like that. So that's the kind of struggles we've had, and it's not from any merit of the officers of challenging the valuer, asking those questions, forwarding on our requests. It's just that things aren't coming back in a timely manner for us to then be able to do it. So we're sat here on the 20th of February having asked questions at least 2 months ago that we don't have the answers for to be able to do any audit work on council dwellings. That's just one example.
Okay, thank you. I'll move over to Claire, if you can give us your comments, please.
Yeah, so again, we have struggled with getting responses back from our value, and we have obviously put those requests in early January. I challenged the council dwelling valuation in December and didn't really get a satisfactory response back, which has been shared with Ernst & Young, and we are still pursuing responses to that and obviously getting more detail as we possibly can. Unfortunately, the valuations were done well over 18 months ago, and obviously from the valuer's point of view were not necessarily a priority, because they would be starting their 22-23 valuations. So this is unfortunately the issue that we're facing, that we are asking the questions, but unfortunately having to wait for those responses to come back to us from a third party.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Addison, if you have a question, then I'll come to Michael Whitworth and Councillor Pengelly.
Thank you, Chair. It's not so much of a question, Chair, it's more of a comment. Having sat on the Audit and Governance Committee of Corby Borough Council for several years, we raised every year since Ernst & Young were in place the quality of the audit and the delays in the audits coming forward. So it's not all one-sided, Chair.
Thank you for that perspective. I'll go to Michael Whitworth and then to Councillor Pengelly.
Yeah, just a quick question from my perspective. Is this the same valuer that we've had in previous occasions, or is it a new valuer?
It's the same valuer.
It is, okay. And they've not given us any responses to the increases?
They have, but it's not satisfactory.
Okay. It's just that it's not really acceptable for somebody to just say it's not my priority, is it? And we're paying them to, or they are being paid to do this. So how can we, is there any way we can escalate this to a different level?
I'm already in conversations with the director of the valuation firm already, so not really, no.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Pengelly.
Yeah, if this was Grant Thornton doing this report today to say all these issues have come forward, then we could look on that and say, yes, we accept it. But we as a council, the Corby Borough Council, were highlighting issues around the auditors for many, many years. And we kept saying that things aren't being passed and things aren't going right here. We're not getting the information that required. Sometimes there weren't meetings for months, were there, Jean? And this is concerning. When you say that, and I know you've come into this, so I apologise, but it's your company. When you say that there were past issues and probably mistakes made or for audit not done correctly. How far have you looked back? Well, what have you said then? Because what you said is things weren't picked up. £48 million to me seems a lot of money not to pick up. And we have been highlighting the fact about the valuation, and Jonathan Waterworth's been arguing that some of the valuations put by yourselves were wrong, and we've been sort of saying, Audit, why is this? So this is what I don't understand. How long has this gone back for? If you've looked at last year's, there was issues, were the issues the year before that, the year before that, because we as a council want to make sure that we do everything correctly with our new auditors, of course. And if figures were wrong going back many years, then we've got problems.
Thank you. Would you like to come back on that, Liz, and then to you, Claire? Thank you.
I fully understand that EYs and all audit firms, but EY in particular, have been delayed in their audits. That is 100% correct. So I'm not refuting that at all on the timescale or the delivery or kind of completing these things. What I would say is that we are now auditing this set of accounts in this time frame, and we are trying to get it done in a short, sharp time frame. I have put on it the best people in my office to get this audit done and to work with management to ensure we do that. On the point, the £48 million isn't, we don't know it's wrong, and it isn't anything to do with last year. So as at the 31st of March 2020, the council dwellings had a valuation. They were signed off, they were materially correct. What has changed is the valuer, we think, has changed the valuation basis of those council dwellings. And therefore the £48 million difference has come from the valuer. So it's nothing to do with EY's audit last year, it's that the valuer has changed the valuation basis of those council dwellings, and we are just challenging to say, I don't understand why that valuation basis has changed. So it's not an error, it's not a fault in EY's audit, it's that there's something in the Corby 2021 accounts that does not make sense to me from a read-through and from the level of information we've received so far from the valuer. So it's not that there's anything wrong with EY's audit in 1920.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Claire?
Yeah, one of the biggest things is that you have to bear in mind is that valuations are very subjective, and whilst we may disagree about them, they will come up with differences of opinion, and that's what it is, and that's what we have to work through. So the 48 million or 46 million is not an error. It's just an opinion that a valuer has provided of the council dwellings valued as at the 31st March 2021. What I don't understand and what we're trying to establish is at the time when these valuations took place, was there any instruction from Corby Borough Council to change the methodology? Again, all those officers are no longer with us, so again, we're coming in it fairly fresh, 18 months down the line of evaluation already occurring, and trying to understand what those numbers are trying to tell us and represent. So I've challenged it, I've passed that information back over to EY. Wilkeshead and Eve now have to step up and respond to those, but they've been, while some say they're not responding on council dwellings, they have responded a lot on all our investment properties, so all of that's been done. So whilst they're not responding on some of it, obviously we're providing them with a lot of requests, and it's taking a long time for them to turn it around. But they will respond, and we will get an answer that I think will be satisfactory to both ourselves and EY. So it's not an error, and I think, you know, whilst what we will be looking at from Corby Borough Council's point of view is when we looked prior to 18-19 before EY started, again, the auditors would have had a different opinion and would have been satisfied with the evaluations that were provided at that point in time. And again, when you then move to a different audit team, you know, sometimes they always have a different opinion, and it's just subjective, and we have to try and change with that. But obviously the time that EY joined us was at the time when we started to embrace local government reform, and lots of things were moving around. So I think it's just an unfortunate set of circumstances.
Okay, I think what we can summarise from that is we're concerned. We respect your professional position, and we accept that you've got to do what you've got to do to get those valuations. What we've done is we've moved this a couple of times, sometimes at the request of Neil, actually, for some of it. And we were getting more and more concerned as it went further in time, and now we'd set a deadline for April. So what I'm concerned about is, are we still going to meet April? Can we do what do we got to do on our side to do that, and what have you got to do on your side to do that? So I'm looking for, I accept everything that's been said, and what can we do? How can we get this done in accordance with the same timeline? I'll come to you first and then I'll go to you, Liz, if that's okay.
So like I alluded to earlier, what I have done and with working with Janice and my team is I have stepped into the space of being the audit manager for Corby Borough Council and unfortunately moved individuals on who weren't performing to the best of what we were expecting to see in terms of working papers, etc. Again, it has put us on the back foot, but everybody's focus, the whole team is in the office, the whole team are coming in and are present, and we are working diligently through the requests that are there and doing them as quickly as we possibly can. Again, we're trying to work with Liz's team to ensure that if we can't provide it, what's the alternative, and trying to make sure, unfortunately, we are falling down rabbit holes where we're not finding the quality of information in 1920 to support 2021. So we are having to do it twice over, unfortunately. So, you know, that is unfortunately where we are. But we are endeavouring, we've both had the conversation where we are trying to make sure we can deliver this by April.
Thank you for that. So I can see you're still committed to deliver in April. Can I ask for your comments, please, Liz?
We set out a timetable. We had from the 9th of January to mid-March for my audit team to be on site. Obviously, we've lost 10 weeks because we pulled 2 weeks of the audit because there was just nothing for us to do. Today, I've not got the team working on Corby because last week we had it, so then the finance team, but obviously it was half term for lots of the finance team as well, that then all the portal requests were cleared and all the samples were back with us, so then we could be productive and work. I think 11 got returned last week out of the 80 odd that were outstanding. So there is a lot of things that are still outstanding. Hearing what is said today, and what I kind of communicated yesterday to Claire and Janice is that if we don't hit that mid-March and we don't have things to keep us productive the rest of this week and kind of to that point, there is no staff availability, which I'm sure Neil told you many times. And I'm in charge of the Luton team, so I'm lead partner for Luton. Effectively, the only way we come back before January 2024 to do the rest of the Corby audit is to pull another council's audit, which then means where I've got agreed dates with that council, I pull that audit team, come back and finish Corby and move them back. So that would then please you. And it's an interesting reaction from members, that you have to remember we have a finite amount of resource. We have an audit team, everyone has their bookings, everyone has their agreed dates of when you're going in, and then people need to be working with us, which the finance team are, to deliver to that time frame. So I don't want to pull the audit team, I don't make those decisions lightly, but I also don't want the costs racking up on the Corby audit, which then we will come to you with a massive overrun fee to say this is then when what it's cost us to do. So we are committed and we want to do this Corby audit. I want to be able to sign off, I want Corby off my board, I want to deliver the audit report for the committee to then sign off by the end of April. That is 100% what I and my team are committed to. And we will work with Claire and her team to ensure that that happens.
Thank you. I've got a couple of members. I'll just make a comment. That's quite an alarming statement that you just made there, that if we don't meet the April deadline, we're looking, you know, we'll have another audit committee and it's going to be January next year. So we'll probably come on to it afterwards, but I think we've got to make all endeavours collectively. We're in this together. You know, you don't want this hanging on until January next year. And I know we don't want it as a council. So I'll go to members. And I know there was a few had their hands up, and I think Councillor Level had his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Liz, I actually entirely understand where you're coming from. I used to have the same sort of situation. It's just a fact of life. Jobs are scheduled. There's a number of staff. They're all scheduled in. If audits have to be moved, it's a nightmare trying to reschedule them, particularly in a busy period. And I know that I pushed Neil on this quite hard in the past, and he used to say, yes, we're doing our best. But I do understand where you're coming from. So it is beholden on us to do all we can, we NNC, to do all we can to make sure that the information is ready for you. And it's unfortunate that you said you had to pull out the staff for a fortnight last month, but because that also impacts the audit fee, I would imagine. And on the subject of the audit fee, the chairman did make the point that you, of course, are new to this audit. You don't have the experience of NNC, although I'm sure you have lots of experience of local government. And so, again, I actually asked Neil this about 3 months ago, and he said that any costs which you would incur as a result of the change of your personnel, EY would of course absorb. But equally, where you think that you need to do extra work, for whatever reason, and I don't think we should necessarily try and second-guess your professional judgment on risk, because it's at the end of the day, it is your judgment, nobody else's. We should be aware of that, and we should just accept that if you have to do more work for whatever reason, if it's not as a result of your staff changes, then it is what it is.
Thank you for those comments. And there was another, Councillor Pengelly, thank you.
Yeah, I'm asking the 151 officer and Ernst & Young, what are the consequences and risks to this authority, North Northamptonshire, if the accounts aren't signed off, if the audit account isn't signed off by the end of April and we have to wait another year? Because I'm sure there will be things that will put a risk onto this council within the capital funds and whatever. So could somebody respond, please?
I'll ask Janice to respond on that in a second, but I think one of the big impacts is going to be on Liz's professional colleague to her left. So I might ask Kieran to make a comment before we go to Janice, because obviously that impacts the starting position. It causes significant consequences elsewhere, and I'd like you to explain how you would feel with that delay and what it would be as an impact, please.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think for us, obviously we need all of the legacy accounts signed off, and the disaggregation of balances at the county sorted out, so that a firm set of draft accounts can be provided for us to start the audit. And until we get a set of draft accounts with that information, there's a very limited amount of work that we can do to progress things. So yeah, if we're not going to get that until January next year, then that does cause concerns about us being able to start our audit substantially before that.
Thank you. To take your comments on what it'd mean for us as an organisation if we was to have one outstanding audit going on to 24, and obviously Kieran's explained what it means for GT.
It's just really about risk, isn't it? Because we can't obviously move on to do NNC's accounts with any amount of certainty. So we always end up being delayed and things going further and further back, which adds to the audit risk that had been mentioned previously, because things are further away from where they should be by the time you get round to the audit. So all that adds to that risk. So we're as keen as anyone, and I absolutely agree, Councillor Level, things not reconciling is totally unacceptable, and you know, individuals are no longer with us as a result of some of those things. But it is absolutely essential for us that we need to move on as an authority, and that's why, as Claire said, we've released Claire to just focus on doing the Corby audit now, to absolutely try as best we can to get this over the line, because the risk to us if we don't get this over the line and get those balances settled and moved on, and then move on into subsequent audits, that then we can make sure that everything's ready for years to come beyond that, is quite difficult for us, and it puts pressures as well on Grant Thornton as our auditors for the way that they've got to do their assessments of us as a council, and it starts to put pressure on them to try and get things done quickly, because we're all trying to catch up, and they too will have their own resources and timelines and timescales. So it is really, really imperative that we put what we can to try and get Corby over the line as fast as we can.
Thank you. I think you can see where we are, and Claire's just told me she'll move heaven and earth to do this, and you know, Janice has put Claire on this, which is a big commitment. So we're like pleading in a way that let's get this over the line for April, because I think the consequences are considerable. So if you could do that, and that would be greatly appreciated.
Which we are trying to do, and I want it gone as much as everyone else does. We want to just kind of close it down, be done with it, and kind of hand it over to Grant Thornton to a certain extent, and then and then have that way forward. That is what we're doing. Which is probably causing some of the issues. We've put really good people on it to just get in and get it done. So we will continue to work. I meet with Claire weekly, which I don't do on any other audit. And definitely not at district council level. So we will do that. And if we need to ramp up the level of meetings that I attend weekly with Claire, then we will do that.
Okay, thank you.
I want to come back to April with a...
Thank you for that commitment. That's really appreciated. One final point I'll raise is a point that Kieran raised, which is where is EY in relation to NCC? Because I know that's managed by the West, but it impacts us obviously, and we don't want any delays there. So I wonder if you could update us from a firm. But I don't know if you're involved in that audit, but I'm sure you're aware of the situation.
I'm not personally involved in the audit, but it sits on my Luton board, so I do know because obviously I've moved in staff around to deliver it. I think, as far as I'm aware, we are waiting for further information. That I keep booking the same 2 people for two weeks for the last few months, and then it has to keep moving because we don't have the information we need. So we are again set up to sign. We have those people floating, and I will remove the 2 people from whatever audit they are on to do the NCC audit and wrap up and closure when we have the information that we need.
Okay, thank you for that update. I don't know if Janice has got any further insight from the council's perspective, because you deal with the West frequently. Is there anything you can add or not?
No, not from the county council. I know we're waiting for the infrastructure assets as being one of the most significant things, but obviously they came through just before Christmas, I believe, the guidance on that. So I don't think there's anything significant. As you say, I think it is the final tweaks, Liz, to try and get the county council over the line, because again, we're interested in obviously finding out what the final balances are so we can confirm the disaggregation between ourselves and West Northamptonshire.
Okay, thank you for that, and thank you for your answering all those questions. You know, we do appreciate it, and I hope you don't think we was unfair. No. Okay, if there's no more questions from members on agenda item 4, we'll move on to agenda item 5, which is a verbal update from Grant Thornton. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I guess it's...
You can do a prayer and seconder just to note the report.
Thank you for that. Apologies, I missed one out there. So could we have a proposer for that report, please? Councillor Marks and a seconder. Seconder for the report. Thank you, Councillor Lee. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Anyone against or abstaining? No, that's unanimous then. Thank you for that. Kieran, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Very short update from us. So we've continued to do our planning work, including looking at the legacy IT systems that will be relied upon in putting together the accounts for 21-22. And we've also done the value for money work for the year, and an interim annual auditor's report has been shared with management for comments, and that's back with me now just to process some of the changes and make sure that it's as up to date as it can be at this point. I think at present we're expecting a set of draft accounts, and I'm going to look at Claire while I say this, April time-ish.
Yeah, we are actually working on a draft set of accounts with draft opening positions as they are, obviously subject to audit, and obviously the 2 outstanding from County and Corby. But we have been working on producing a set of accounts.
So with that in mind, we should aim to have an audit plan ready in about April time to come to the committee, setting out the exact risk issues that we're going to be addressing and the timetable for the work for getting the final accounts audit complete.
Thank you. Look to see if any members have any questions. Just check with Fiona. We don't need to take any vote on this, do we? No. Okay, if there's nothing further that you'd like to add, we'll move on. We'll move on to agenda item 6, which is the internal audit progress report, and I'll hand over to Rachel to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the latest update on delivery of the internal audit plan for the current financial year. So the Appendix 1 provides a full copy of the update report as usual. So I'll just take members through some of the key sections of the report. As provided as usual, on page 69 is a copy of the internal audit plan with the status of each of the assignments as at the time of producing this update report for you. Since the last committee meeting, we've finalised a further 5 audit reports. So I've provided the key findings as usual for you in section 3.1 of the appendix, which starts on page 62 of your papers. So just running through those reports briefly. Obviously you're provided with an overview of the scope and the key findings, but just to run through those briefly. The first was in relation to governance and shared and delegated services. So for this review, we focused on the inter-authority agreement, which is in place between ourselves and West Northamptonshire Council, looking at how this works in terms of managing our hosted or lead authority arrangements, looking at the control framework and the compliance with that over the last year. And based on the findings, we've given a conclusion of a good control environment overall, although we have made some recommendations around strengthening that further. We looked at particularly around things like the financial charges being completed in a timely manner. We've also looked at the full, whether the performance information that's being generated in relation to this arrangement provides a full and meaningful assessment of performance. So again, there's some areas where we could improve the control environment and the compliance in those areas, so we've made some recommendations along those lines. So overall, given the basis of the testing and what we found, we've given a satisfactory assurance opinion for both the design and the compliance with the controls in relation to this arrangement, and we have an action plan in place to take those issues forward. The second is in relation to the second of the areas we wanted to focus on for ethical governance. So within the audit plan, we had an allowance for reviews on ethical governance, and we split that into 2 reviews. We reported to you at the last meeting on the review around the culture and ethics. And the other half, we were looking at the member officer protocol as a particular area that the monitoring officer wanted some assurance around. So we're happy that there's a sound framework in place for the management of this, looking at the good working relationship between members and officers and defining those roles. We also looked at some compliance testing around how this had been applied in the case of any disputes, and we were happy with the assurance that we were able to give around that. We made some recommendations around further strengthening some of the areas, so looking at things like training, which the monitoring officer is keen to take forward. But overall, we've given a good assurance opinion on the design of the control environment and substantial assurance based on the compliance testing that we completed. So the third report was in relation to leisure provision. So we have a number of different contractual arrangements in place for managing leisure facilities around North Northamptonshire. So we really wanted to look at how we're managing that to make sure that we're getting good performance from those arrangements. Ultimately, we were able to see that a new process was implemented in April 2022, which embedded some really good performance management arrangements, looking at making use of specialist software. We also have quarterly performance reports and formal meetings, quarterly site visit inspections. So we were able to see a good evidence of a control environment in place here. And we were happy that we were able to give our highest assurance opinion on the design of the control environment on that basis. We have given a good assurance in terms of the compliance, just because we identified some areas where we thought some of the arrangements could be further improved, particularly around the quality of the information and making sure that we're happy around the completeness of some of those responses as well, which was something that was in hand at the time of audit. So that's, again, a good assurance opinion on compliance. The fourth was in relation to waste management. So again, we were dealing with a number of different legacy arrangements here with different delivery models. Obviously, the long-term vision that we've seen is to try and bring together a single strategy, migrating our services to a single operational model across the piece, and work on that appears to be progressing well. Based on the testing that we performed, which was based on the service area's own risk register, where we sought some assurance around how they are managing each of those key risks, we were happy that the controls in place were good at that strategic level, and we were able, from some compliance testing around invoice payments and some of the health and safety controls, that we were able to give a good level of assurance over compliance as well. Just to give the committee a feel for this, I wanted to use this as an audit to get a high-level assurance around how we manage waste management across the authority. What I'd like to do is then build upon this in future years by doing some further detailed testing around some of those key contracts to drill down into that a little bit further so that we get some really good assurance around how those are being managed as in terms of individual contracts. So I think this gives us a good starting point to understand how waste management is being delivered. So we've given a good level of assurance on that basis for both the design of the controls and the compliance at the time of the audit. So the last audit is in relation to asset management. So this focused on the council's leased assets. And when I say leased assets, that also includes assets where we have licences in place, where similar arrangement but slightly different setup. So we were looking at the council's portfolio of these non-residential assets. So they're assets that we lease out, or as I say, license out to third parties. It's obviously a significant area of income for the authorities, so we wanted to get some assurance around how those agreements are set up, how these are managed and monitored, how we have an oversight of these arrangements, how we manage the risks associated with being that corporate landlord, essentially, for these assets, and looking at some of those key areas, and also some of the changes in legislation that are coming up in relation to energy performance certificates as well. So we wanted to get some assurance around how these things are being managed. So unfortunately, we have given a limited assurance on this one. So this is the only report that's coming to you today that's had a less than satisfactory assurance opinion. So we've given a limited assurance based on the fact that at the time of doing the audit, we didn't have a single source of information in terms of all of our licensed and leased assets. So we did struggle to identify a complete list of those. But also it's that lack of oversight around the status of each of the rent reviews, for example, whether or not the lease is up to date. Unit inspections and all of these things, we haven't seen a single source of truth, I suppose, around all of those records. And we also need to see that consolidated strategy, a single strategy across the council as to how we manage the risks associated with these assets. So based on some sample testing, we did identify some gaps in some of those areas as well, which further gave us concern in terms of a compliance perspective. As I said, as reflected in the findings, no unit inspections were evidenced, for example, at the time of the audit, and we wanted to see some assurance around how the changes in EPC rating requirements on an ongoing basis were going to be managed going forward. So these issues were already noted. I know that it was something that was high on the agenda for the service area. It's an area that has been subject to a restructure. We now have a head of asset management in place to lead this and take it forward. But ultimately, we've given a limited assurance, as I say, in relation to the design and the compliance. Just to mention, obviously, we did a separate audit last year that I brought to the Committee on Asset Management. Now, this looked at, again, it was looking at corporate assets on that one, but it was looking at statutory compliance regimes. And that received a limited assurance opinion as well. Obviously, I brought that to the committee last year. And on that basis, we are doing a follow-up audit at this time. We're just working through that audit at the moment. And I'm pleased to say we are seeing progress in that area in terms of the procedural coverage. So I've been able to take some comfort that things have progressed. We are only just starting the sample testing around the compliance area, so I'll obviously feed back to the committee once that audit is complete. But just to make that linkage and explain the differences between those two audits. Just to mention also, we do have the Assistant Director here attending the committee today to give any assurances that you might be seeking around how this is being taken forward, and perhaps to go into any further detail that you wanted to go into. Did you want to pause there, Chair, or do you want to come back to that after I've concluded the rest of the report?
If you conclude the rest of the report, and then we'll go to the significant points after that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just drawing through the rest of the report, so we have the latest rolling risk review feedback for the committee as well. So that's summarised for you on page 66, but the full details on page 79. So as I mentioned at the last committee meeting, we're trying to select risks from the strategic risk register where the inherent risk score is high. It's in that red category. So we are reliant heavily on the controls that are listed on the risk register to bring that down to the current risk score that's being reported to committee. So for this one, we selected risk 4, which is in relation to business continuity, potential disruption to service delivery due to an unplanned incident or emergency. So I won't go through all of it, but we've given a RAG rating as usual against each of those controls as to whether or not it's in place and operating as expected based on the entry in the risk register. So we've given a green rating on all of those because we were happy that it generally reflected what we found to be in place. But we have made some recommendations around further clarifying the risk register entry and reflecting some further areas that actually we could place some further reliance upon in terms of sources of assurance. And we've given you latest updates on the actions that are on there in the risk register as well, so that you can get an interim view on that in terms of kind of real-time assurance, as we've talked about at previous meetings. Otherwise, within the report, as usual, on page 84 is an update on the implementation of audit recommendations. So we've closed 39 audit recommendations since the last meeting, which is pleasing to see. That includes 13 high priority recommendations. At the time of producing this report, we had 25 actions which were under 3 months overdue and a further 36 which were over 3 months overdue. And within that category that we always focus on, of any high priority actions over 3 months, there were 4 at the time of producing this report, which is provided in table 4 on pages 85 to 87. I'm pleased to give the committee a further update on this, that the 2 actions on page 85, which related to enforcement files and legal services, have both now been concluded, so those are now closed, so we can take those off the report going forward. Just to also mention, the last thing really from me on this is that we have mentioned some recommended amendments to the audit plan coverage. Obviously, at this, as we are now in the last quarter of the financial year, we have got everything assigned, everything's in hand for delivery, but we are also continually reviewing the plan to make sure we're looking at the right areas. There are a couple of areas that we have identified where actually we feel value would be maximised by postponing the audit by a few months into the new financial year. So, for example, the recruitment audit which we had planned, from an audit perspective, we would be looking very much around the process around recruitment, so the pre-employment checks, how all the paperwork associated with recruitment, rather than the policies, which obviously would be more of a scrutiny function. But because we would be focusing so heavily on those processes, we were made aware that this new e-recruitment system is actually just going live. So if we were to perform testing on the recruitment processes and the paperwork over the last 12 months, it actually wouldn't have been of great value because the systems are imminently changing. So what we would like to do is postpone that work until that new e-recruitment system is up and running and we've got some examples to test. And then we can make recommendations based on actual current and future practice. Similarly, we had an audit around partnerships within the audit plan for quarter 4. As we have just appointed a new head of performance, intelligence and partnerships who will be joining soon, and there is an intention to develop a new partnership register in around April this year. Again, it's the view that the audit would be of more value once those things are in place and we actually have more to audit and we have the key officer there to take us through that work. So those are some of the amendments that we've proposed, and those are covered off within the covering report. As I've mentioned also within the report, some of the audits we have delivered during the last quarter in particular have been quite resource intensive because of the number of issues and the fact that we are dealing not just with one system but essentially with 4 or 5 in many cases has taken more resource and more audit days from my team. So if we were to postpone those audits, that would obviously help cover some of that additional pressure this year, and also some additional unforeseen grant work that we've also had to deal with in the last quarter as well. So that would help in terms of the audit days. So that's a run through the key sections, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, Michael, thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. We spoke in November about I think you have 50% staff levels and you're using a lot of contract staff. Could you give an update on your staffing levels? Because one of the things you mentioned, 42% of the audits are not finished, some have not, well, 7% not started. Will you be able to hit the deadline? Because I'm not sure, what is your deadline, the tax year end, so 5th April? You've got 1 month to do 42% basically. I mean, is that achievable?
Thank you.
Yes, so I'm happy to comment on that. And actually, I had intended to give an update on the recruitment, actually, so that's a useful prompt. I'm pleased to say we had a recent recruitment round over the Christmas New Year period, trying to encourage people to come and join Northamptonshire for the new year. And I'm pleased that was actually quite successful. We've made 3 appointments as a result of that, which has made a big difference in terms of our resourcing. And the plan, as I discussed at the previous audit committee, was the hope to get that team fully resourced for the new financial year, which will tie in nicely with the new appointments joining us. So that's really positive, I think, in terms of the resourcing going forward. In terms of the rest of this financial year, I obviously gave the assurance to the committee at the last meeting that all of the remaining internal audits have been allocated, so that the resource is there and they are primed to undertake the audit work. As I say, some of the audits have taken a little bit longer than we'd have expected due to the complexity, and we wanted to make sure we did a good job. So we have had a few pressures in that respect, but obviously we're looking at some amendments today as well, which would help in in terms of those pressures. But in terms of our year end, we work to the 31st of March in terms of the financial year. Our main priority really is to make sure we have all of your reports finalised in readiness to produce an internal audit report, which comes to you in the new financial year. But ultimately, I work to the 31st of March to try and get all of those audit reports out the door, in at least as a draft report at that stage. That's the target that we work to. So hopefully that's answered all the questions.
Thank you for that. I think if we could move now, thank you for joining us today, Jonathan. That's appreciated. I'll just ask you to comment on the findings of the report and your views about how we deal with that and what the plans are going forward. I think it's really important. Rachel mentioned it as well. There's a parallel here with the compliance side from the prior year. My own opinion, it looks like it's the complexity arising from the multiple councils and all the different systems. Did you have any further thoughts on the corporate landlord model? If you could update us on your thoughts there, please.
Yeah, of course, Chair, and good afternoon, members. So in terms of the report, I suppose the key part that came out was around strategy in terms of a single strategy for the council. So what we've been working on over the last year or so is putting together a suite of different policy documents. So last year we had the community asset transfer policy that went through executive. In December, we had the disposal policy that went through executive. And then we're looking at bringing forward 2 more policies with respect to leasehold management and an acquisition policy as well. And we're aiming to bring those forward for April this year. In terms of the overall asset strategy, obviously that will draw on those different policies and it will look at what the council's strategic aims are for its portfolio. And that will draw on the policies I've just mentioned, service area strategies that are being formed at the moment. It will draw on some of the rationalisation work that we've been doing with the asset scrutiny panel that's been set up and we've been working with over the last sort of 6 months or so. It will also draw on things like our future accommodation plans, which are coming together now. So the asset strategy will come together from all those different documents and pieces of work that have been progressed over time. And obviously that does take time to come together. What it won't necessarily do is go into some of the level of detail that's mentioned in the audit in terms of things like the level of charges and rents and precise lease terms, because each lease will be subject to negotiation and the circumstances of the lease that's been put in place. But what it will do is provide those high-level priorities. So we're looking to bring that forward just shortly after the next 2 policies that we're bringing forward in April this year. In terms of governance and your point around the corporate landlord model, Chair, at the moment, the Constitution at the moment allows service areas to put in place their own lease arrangements, and not all leases are managed by the assets team that sits with me. So what I'm looking to do is progress those considerations around a corporate landlord model, and that would essentially mean that ownership, for want of a better word, of our assets is centralised. We have one single asset team that manage those assets, ensure it's done in accordance with all the property laws. It's managed by suitably qualified staff in terms of those lease arrangements, disposals, acquisitions, etc. And I'm shortly taking a presentation discussion document to the corporate leadership team, hopefully in the next week or so, that will sort of get a steer in terms of which way we want to go, because a corporate landlord model, there's lots of different degrees of corporate landlord model that you can put in place, and not all work for different organisations. So each should work for the organisation itself. And it's also something that is not just an assets thing, it's a whole organisation thing to actually progress. So it's something I'm looking to progress and build into the transformation plan, the place and economy transformation plan for the next year. But indeed, it will take time to actually implement, and obviously resource behind that to progress. And obviously it does link with the compliance audit that we had earlier last year. In terms of data, we are still using different legacy systems that we're still under contract to use, and indeed one of our areas is actually contracted out to an external management company that manages that part of the investment estate. So we are still in a situation where we've got different data sets and different systems, which isn't ideal. But what we are doing is we're currently procuring a new IT system that will replace one that comes to an end next March. And we'll look to combine that with what we need for an asset management point of view, but also the compliance work that I know Rachel's working with the team with at the moment, where we're still managing a lot of that compliance work in a disparate way, when it really, if we brought it all together, it would be a lot more efficient for us to manage from a practical point of view. So yeah, I'm happy to take any other questions on the report, Chair, but they're my summary points.
Thank you very much. See if there's any questions. Michael, thank you.
Sorry, it was just something, and it probably feeds into Rachel's on asset management as well. Just want to know, are we responsible for the safety checks on these properties as well, as the landlord of them?
So, through you, Chair.
Thank you.
Typically, it will be determined by the terms of the lease. A lot of leases are full repairing and insuring leases, so the tenants are responsible for carrying out those safety checks, carrying out the maintenance, carrying out asbestos, Legionnaire, all those sorts of things. So the fire risk assessments would typically be down to a tenant to undertake. What we can do as a landlord is we can undertake inspections and see if they've complying with those, but as a landlord, there's not an awful lot of power for us to actually make them put things right if there are issues there. And this can cause an issue, particularly from an insurance point of view, where our insurers will also inspect the properties and put forward recommendations, and then we're not always in a position to require tenants to do everything they can do to correct those. So yeah, it is a mixture. Where we are responsible is more where we've got shared properties, so we might have a number of tenants in a building, and typically we would retain some of the responsibility for maintenance and compliance requirements.
Yeah, because that was sort of the concern, was that what the internal audit has shown is that we're not doing a lot of checks. A lot of the checks are not happening, and I wondered about fire, Legionella, etc. Obviously, there was a thing in the news recently about mould in properties, that kind of stuff. So there's an argument that the organisation impact could be quite high rather than moderate on that, because if we are responsible for any of the safety, if something goes wrong, then that's quite a big issue.
Chair, just
Yeah, okay, if you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, so where we are responsible, we undertake those checks, and we have our compliance register that monitors those checks. Where the tenant's responsible, I think with the audit, we were undertaking some of the inspections, but we weren't necessarily documenting those properly for the auditor to say, yes, we've definitely done it on this date, and this is what we checked. So we've tightened up on that in terms of those inspections, in terms of the parades, and also doing it on a risk-based approach in terms of the size of the property and the issues and the works that what the tenant is using the property for as well.
And I think what Rachel was saying about the follow-up programme is really important. So we've got an early insight into some of the aspects of the follow-up programme being positive. We'll have to wait and see. But at the next committee, we'll hear were those compliance weaknesses being addressed from the follow-up programme, and is there evidence to support that? I know there's the parallel with the compliance here, but there's also a parallel with the residential, which is probably what you was thinking about with the mould and things like that. That's like an of-the-moment thing, but all those compliance things are important in residential as well, but we factor that into the programme elsewhere. So I think we're getting the assurance we require. If it turns out that there is assurance, it may be negative assurance, but I don't know if you've got any further comments there on that. No.
Not on the audit, Chair, unless there are any other questions.
Did you have a question, Councillor Edison? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a very difficult job to do, because pulling together all these different assets from the 4 or 5 different councils. And I know you've been going through some restructuring, and there's been difficulties at chairing other departments where we've not had enough staff. Are you confident that you've got enough staff coming on board or on board to complete the tasks?
Thank you. For you, Chair. So we completed the Tier 4-5 restructure, which is the 2 levels of management that report to myself last year. So that completed around September, so the sort of time that we were undertaking the audit. I was having those members of staff appointed or recruiting new members of staff to come in to address some of these issues. What we're looking at now is the remaining tiers of staff to look at restructure across the whole service. So there's about over 200 members of staff that will be involved in that restructure, and we'll be looking to phase that over time. In terms of the asset side, in terms of that staffing resource, that's something we're looking to address through that restructure to make sure we have got sufficient numbers of staff. Where we have recruited, we've I suppose it's been mixed in terms of the success with some recruitment. We've done well in other respects and not so well in others, as is the case. But I think with that new structure coming through, provided we get the staff through the doors, we create those new posts, then we'll be in a position. But that's really key for us next, driving forward that restructure across the whole service to get the staff in place to follow up on all the audit actions that we've got.
Thank you. If I could go to Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I wonder whether we are missing out on revenue. Just anecdotal example, I tried to book a room in the Kettering Borough Council offices a year ago, and I was told there's no policy, we've got no rates, so don't really know how to rent this out to you. I tried again 2 weeks ago, still no policy and no rates. Now I would have paid to hire a room for an external body, but the council has missed out on revenue. So that doesn't seem to be any progress in compiling that. Okay, that's just anecdotal evidence, but do you think we're making progress in getting those arrangements in place?
Through you, Chair. So in terms of that specific example, we do have a fees and charges register, and it should include a rate for Kettering. So apologies if you've been misinformed on that. I can follow up on that afterwards and just make sure that you get those rates, because I thought that had been solved a couple of weeks ago. In terms of your question about income, so we just had a successful back rent agreed with one of our tenants, which has boosted our rental income quite considerably in terms of back rent and new rent coming forward. So we are keeping up with those rental amounts. Where you're at risk of not keeping your rent coming in is if you're not dealing with the lease renewals. And lease renewals are always an important one where in terms of making sure the tenant is committing to a further lease, and you're running that risk if you don't get those lease renewals in place that the tenant might go. Now, it's a risk at any time that a tenant could fold or go, but it does heighten that risk. So that's really our focus now, is just making sure that all the lease renewals have been picked up. So we've been doing a lot of work in specific areas to make sure that those leases, which had not been looked at for some time, have been, and be putting in place new leases. That's where the highest risk around those. That's our approach.
Thank you for that. Councillor Pengelly.
Yeah, you've highlighted the fact that in most of your areas, you know where your assets are, and you've probably got an idea of the valuation of them now, which is absolutely brilliant. And I know there's a little bit more work to do with the council on seeing what assets we don't need. And when we decide what assets we don't need, have we got teams in place that will be able to put them in the market and get money into the council? Because in the past I've been told there has been a shortage of staff to be able to sell parcels of land and whatever, and it's really important that once we've identified what is surplus or requirements, we get rid of that and get that money back in our coffers, so you've got money to play with. Okay.
Okay, would you like to comment on that? Thank you.
Can for you, Chair. So yeah, that was a part of the restructure for the asset management team, to make sure we've got that resource that when we make those decisions, is an asset surplus or not, and are we going to dispose of it or look at a different use? We've got the team and the resource to progress those, not just from an asset management point of view, but also from a facilities management point of view. So that decanting a building or preparing it for sale is quite a significant task. So it's making sure we've got all the resources in the round that we need.
Okay, thank you for that. I think obviously we had 2 audits with limited assurance, and normally we'd be a lot more critical, but I think there's no simple solution to this, and we're sympathetic to the challenge in a way. So I know you're taking proposals to the SLT, and if you could keep this committee informed rather than us wait, because that's part of the resolution of this issue, and you know, whatever proposals you come up with, I think that will give a certain level of higher assurance, because you know it was inherently riskier with the model that we had. So if we could ask for that as an action, please. If there's any other questions on that point, there's a number of other points. I thought what I was disappointed about was the follow-ups, because the follow-ups are key. And there There's two which relate to the Children's Trust, so we'll park that and come on to that when we do the Children's Trust. But I was also disappointed with the legal services one. Now, it's been implemented, but they asked for it to be delayed, and they told us how important it was to meet the things at the meeting before last. And they said we'll definitely get it done by December, so I think it should be noted that they delayed it and then didn't meet it, and it has been done now, but that was quite disappointing from that part of the council, I believe. On a positive note, I think and we mentioned this last time, and I find it comforting again, was the rolling risk review. I think that gives us some real-time assurance, and I think that's a positive again, and I think that will feed into when we have the planning day, and I think we can use that more going forward, because I think that gives us some assurance throughout the year and on emerging things, and so that's a very positive I'd like to raise there. The final point on this report is there was a change to the audit plan, and I think we should agree those. I felt comfortable with them. I don't know if members had any comments or had any concerns. If not, I'll move to the recommendation. So the recommendation is that we note the progress report attached to Appendix 1 and approve the proposed amendments to the 22-23 audit plans in the postponing of audits on fixed assets, recruitment and partnerships. Could I ask for a proposer for that, please? Councillor Marks and a seconder. Councillor Pengelly. And all those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you for answering those questions, Jonathan. That's appreciated. If we now move on to agenda item 7, which is a presentation of Northamptonshire Children's Trust audit reports for 2021-22, and Anne-Marie will be introducing that, and then we'll perhaps speak to the officers who kindly joined us today from West Northants and from the Trust. I think I'll run through a bit of a timeline before we go into it, because we had an audit committee 5.5 months ago in September, and you'll recall that we had some serious concerns, I would describe them as, about the audit and governance approach in the Children's Trust. And we were presented with an annual audit report then, with an opinion, and it was based on 10 audits. We did ask at that meeting for the annual report of the service delivery contract. It wasn't made available at the time. It subsequently came to the council, and we've all received these papers in the last day or so they were quite late. When we got that annual report of the service delivery group, it referred to a level of assurance which wasn't in the annual audit report. It was moderate in the annual audit report, and it gave a level of assurance. The number of audits had also changed, because that referred to 11 audits, and that report was finalised before they got the one which was 10. So we went to the minutes, so that the next point is the full council that we had on 24th of November. And so we was asked to review that and review that annual report, which we did. But we had concerns because of the gaps in assurance. So we didn't adopt it fully because we noted there were gaps in sources of assurance as debated at the Audit and Governance Committee on 5th of September be noted, and the committee was seeking actions from the NCT to review their control processes and assurance framework and report back to this committee, which is what we're doing today. We've got some papers, but then we go to last week, and I noted that there was a Children's Trust Joint Committee held on the 15th of February. And item 6 in there referred to the risk management approach, and it was quite detailed, and it was quite assuring until you looked in the appendix and there wasn't anything. So that report was concerning after it was initially comforting. Then we will have the report presented, but then when I look at the report that's attached, it's a completely different report. It's changed entirely. It is not the same report that was at the meeting in September. In fact, it's titled differently. It's an internal audit annual report, an annual statement of assurance. If I've got the papers in front of me from what I had in September. Now it's BDO's internal audit summary of conclusions. So that is not the same thing. There's no overall annual audit opinion in there. It's changed. Not only that, we've now not got 11 audits or 10 audits, we've now got 12. So I don't know which report this is and where it's coming from, but it's changed at least 3 times. And this was a key source of assurance. So I've got some serious concerns about what I'm being presented with here, because reports, any report we get should be dated. None of them are dated. So you know who knew what at what point in time. And there's no dates on any of these reports. And the fundamentals have changed. You're relying on internal audits. What is it, 10, 11, 12? It should not change. And now we've got this report which has got no... What was the head of internal audit opinion is now a summary. So I've got some serious questions to be answered there. I've got some further points, but I'll hand over to Anne-Marie and then perhaps ask the officers who kindly attended to answer those specific points.
Thanks, Chair. My position in this, in the immediate, is to introduce the audit reports that colleagues in the Trust have presented, that we have received via the intelligent client function. I know you've raised a number of points, Chair, that you want to pick up, which I will defer to my Trust colleagues on, but if you want me to pick up the 2 outstanding audits that you meant, the actions that you mentioned earlier that you wanted to pick up, I'm happy to take those now before we move on. I'll do that subsequently.
That'd be a sensible way of organising it, thank you.
So the ICF actions that were outstanding, the delay on those is firstly in relation to the legal advice from Bevan Britain, which we received. That has subsequently been challenged by colleagues in West Northants, asking questions about the separation of independent intelligent client functions for North and West. That's a matter for some debate at present. Those conversations are including the Department for Education, who ultimately will take a decision as to whether we have 1 or 2. In the meantime, colleagues in the ICF are refining the detail of assurance that we take through the ICF around performance and assurance, and there have been a number of changes to the financial reporting which have been delivered through the course of Q3 and into Q4 of this year, and also revisions on some of the performance information. So that work has been done in the background, though we will wait ultimately for the Department for Education to make a judgment on that in line with the Bevan Britain advice.
Thank you for that update. I'll perhaps ask some members and also for Rachel to comment on that response. Has anybody got any comments or questions on the follow-up, and if they consider it appropriate explanations, and then I'll ask Rachel as well. No, okay. Thank you. Do you have any comments on the reasonableness of that, of the movement back in the implementation date, sir?
Yes, obviously we've reflected the latest status in the table, which is obviously supported by Anne-Marie's explanation. Obviously, until this is concluded, I suppose we can't really look to conclude that the issues we highlighted have been concluded, so that needs to follow that process. We'll obviously continue. We do follow this up on a monthly basis as we do all of our open actions, so we'll keep that under review. It'd be nice as soon as we do get a revised date in there, I'll be keen to make sure that the committee receive that rather than having a to be confirmed position. So we'll look to get that in there as soon as we can.
Okay. I mean, it strikes me that's a reasonable approach if you just keep the committee informed, because they're quite key recommendations. That'd be helpful if you could update us when anything material changes.
Absolutely, Chair.
Thank you.
I now hand over to colleagues in the Trust to pick up the detail of the questions that you've asked.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all. The reason we're here is because I think it's important to, through the lens of assurance, build relationships with members across both councils. So, you know, we voluntarily come along to the committee to share the appropriate discussions, be challenged accordingly, and with a view to working together to improve services for children. It's fair to say, as we discussed at the previous meeting in September, that there were some challenges to the audit process on the formation of both North Northamptonshire Council, West Northamptonshire Council and Northamptonshire Children's Trust as 3 different organisations. The audit function was it still is a support service provided by the councils to Northamptonshire Children's Trust. BDO were commissioned by the councils to deliver the audit programme. The report that's in front of you now is the final report. There's been a few challenges with BDO, noted the points about dates, etc., and I can report to the committee that we no longer use BDO as the auditors through the support service now delivered through West Northamptonshire Council, and my colleague Jen is here to talk through those arrangements, and you're happy to take any questions, but please do know that in terms of oversight of our activity, there's the Trust Board as well, which has oversight and some details and information in the papers. So you're happy to take any questions, but we are committed to ensuring that there's appropriate assurance and oversight of activity.
Okay, can I just be clear? Can I just be clear then? That you believe this is the final report, and do you know the date of that report?
Yeah. Well, Andrew.
Yeah, the date was, the final report was received last week. So it was received in December. Sorry, in February. Okay. February 23.
Sorry?
February 23.
February 23, because what we have then is we have the annual report that gave an overall auditor opinion, head of internal audit opinion, and you've only got an audit report in February. That was issued before September, because we had that annual report was available in September, and I've got what was written in that report, and it gave assurance, and it was quite explicit, and that's what we had a problem with at the council. And now we're finding that wasn't a report. Report wasn't done until 5.5 months later.
So yeah, the final report was received in December with the actions from the report. The report that you received around the annual governance was for the audits that have been done through that process at that time, and those findings supplemented by additional information like key performance indicators and other performance frameworks and inspections. The audit programme for the Trust didn't start until February 22. There was one audit that was completed through the lead authority model, and then there was 11 audits completed by BDO as part of that programme. The report that you received in September that fed into the annual report process was the reports that had been completed or partially completed through that process. The full internal programme that was highlighted in the September wasn't completed at that date, and that's what raised the concerns at that time around that programme. Subsequently, the reports have been finished, the actions have been put in place, and the management actions, and now we're working closely with Jen and the team for the development of the 22-23 audit programme, and also the elements of the assurance about monitoring the actions have been put in place from that audit. But say the audit process didn't start until February 22, with the exception of one audit that was completed.
Thank you. We was aware that it only started in month 11 back then, but what we did have was a head of internal audit opinion, which is a key aspect in this whole governance. What we don't have now is a head of internal audit opinion. I don't know what I'm looking at here, because it's BDO's internal audit summary of conclusions. There's no head of internal audit opinion in here. The text has been changed. There's no opinion. So in your annual summary, your annual report that went to this council, they gave the opinion that BDO had given, and now BDO are not giving that opinion in this final report, because the only report I take notice of is the final one, because everything's draft until that point. Okay. So it's called summary. It's changed from head of internal audit opinion. So it's like significantly reduced as a source of assurance, because I can't even tell who the head of internal audit is. I don't know if it's, I don't know, is it you, Jen? I don't know.
It will be me for 22-23.
No, this year we're looking at.
The year you're looking at is 21-22. Now, from my opinion, and having spoken to Andrew and Colin and Rachel about this, the assurance level you were given in August was for 21-22. I agree that was around a limited number of audits, but given that that opinion was issued in August, I would not expect a further opinion to be issued this late in the day, because the work has been done up to that point. So what my team are doing at the moment, again in consultation with relevant officers, is we've received working papers from BDO on the audits completed post-August. We're now looking at those to consider whether they impact the 21-22 year, and if that assurance opinion has to change, or whether they should form part of the 22-23 assurance year.
So you haven't answered the question. Who's the head of internal audit for 2020-21? Sorry, let me get the years right because it's important. 21-22. Who's issuing the head of internal audit opinion, and which document is it in?
The head of internal audit, the head of internal audit assurance opinion was issued in August by BDO.
So I've just been told by your colleague that the final report is the one that we've been issued with now, that was issued in January, and now you're saying the head of internal audit opinion is the one that was issued in August. Can you explain? I'm getting confused.
Just to say, I didn't say that that was the final report. I said this was a summary of the final work of the 21-22 full programme and delivered. The update in August, September was based on the audits that had been produced at place, supported by other information at that time to meet the timelines of the internal audit. So I didn't say that that was there, it was the other programmes that were coming through, the other audits to show a full programme. And I think, as sort of Jen's just said, she's going to use some of that audit work to supplement the 22-23 programme, because the work took place in 20.
You can't have an audit. I don't know what standards we're operating to. You can have an audit done on 1 year and rely on it for another year. I've got no experience in 30 years of dealing with internal audit of that happening. So all those audits which related to the 21-22 opinion can only be used for the 21-22 opinion. You can't use them for a 22-23 opinion. And of course, what I was expecting for the gaps in assurance that we had, I was expecting to see this is our audit approach for this year, this is how it's been risk assessed, this is the plan, and we haven't seen it. I've seen a little bit that some audits have started in, so I don't know, you've stated that a few have started, but they're not progressed very far. So we're in month 11 again, and we've got no audits. We've got no audit plan that I can see. And I don't know when they're going to be delivered. What you can't do is rely on the prior year's audits. That is professionally unacceptable.
Yeah, just to clarify, just on that point, the audits took place in 22-23. So even though they were programmed in for 21-22, so the audit assurance as at August, those were the ones that used. The ones that were completed after August, after that period, form part of the 22-23 opinion.
I challenge that quite strongly because it referred to those audits in the report that we received in September. The 10 audits, as it was then, the ones which are in draft, they form part of the assurance for 21-22. You cannot have an audit report for 1 year. I'm sure that Ernst & Young agree with me on this, because we tried a similar approach there, it didn't work. But we can't have an audit report and some work done, because the scope of that would have been work that delivered against the assurance report, which is now, you're saying that is the August one, and then reinterpret that as another year's. It's not possible.
We're not planning to reinterpret those as part of this year. What we're doing is reviewing the work that was done, because the work I've had from BDO doesn't tell me what year that work was done in. So although those reports were issued in draft, there was a significant amount of work done post-August to finalise those reports, and I need to understand what that work was.
Yeah, but they're what led to the opinion for 21-22. I don't know if any members have comments or I'm missing the point there.
I'm equally baffled, I have to say. Surely the crux of the matter is when the transactions or the investigative work, when was it? What was it looking at? It doesn't matter when it was done, but what months or years was it looking at? Surely that's the important point, and surely that must be obvious. Or if it's not, then it should be.
I agree, and that's why my team are currently reviewing the BDO working papers. We were only provided with those working papers last week. So at the moment, we're working through the BDO working papers for the audits completed after August to determine exactly what was considered as part of those that audit process. I completely agree that it's very late to be looking at it, but unfortunately, that's the information we've been provided with.
But surely he who pays the piper calls the tune. If we don't have the information, rather than you trawling through all these working papers, which I'm sure is incredibly boring, ask BDO. Surely they can tell us. For heaven's sake, we paid them. Well, you've paid them at any rate.
Yes, that would be the ideal solution, Councillor Neville, and I think that's probably, without straying into unprofessionalism, I think I will stick with, yes, that would be the ideal solution, and I have asked those questions. The responses I've had haven't satisfied me, which is why I'm now looking at working papers.
And I can understand that if I'm just going back, because looking at the first page, conclusions rather than conclusions doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
So, any other comments?
I'm totally lost and confused, like I think most of us are on this, that if you can't get the information of this organisation, how can we get it, and how can we make an opinion based on information that you can't give us? It's just a little bit of a mess, and I'm wondering, if you can't get anything, what can we do about approaching BD? Because it's not very good, Chair, is it?
No, I would agree. I mean, the problem that we had back in September was we felt there was an inability to give a level of assurance from the work that was done. We said, you've done 5, and you've got 5 in draft, and you're given an overall audit opinion. And BDO stated we were not involved in the plans which led to this, and they didn't do a risk-based approach. They're explicit, it's in the report. So the first thing I want to say is, what are the risks? Develop your plan from the risks, and then execute it. And it was done by BDO, and it was only half complete, and they drew their overall opinion. And we expressed that. And so what I anticipated at this meeting was you was going to come and tell us what you're doing this year. You know, so that was deficient in our opinion, and that's why this council didn't accept in full the report, the annual report.
Chair, for me, thank you for the comments. As I said earlier, we can come back to another committee. Happy to do it. Happy to work with a group of members outside of the committee to work through what that expectation is. So, you know, this is about us working together, and to share Councillor Pangeli's frustration. I think, you know, this was 3 organisations created on the back of Northamptonshire Children's Trust was created on the back of a statutory direction by the Department for Education due to the history, and it is very frustrating that the audit arrangements that were put in place through the support services agreement were not sufficient. So I definitely recognise that, hence the moves we're making going forwards now, working with Jen and the team directly as opposed to BDO. So, you know, I recognise what everybody's saying, and you know, we need to, you know, we need to move things on and get things better on, as we do on a number of fronts, all of us. So this is there are frustrations, but the offer is there to come back with further information. I apologise if there was an expectation of something at this committee meeting that hasn't been here, but I am working with Jen and the team, have a lot more confidence going forwards in how things will operate.
Information that we asked for before, that we've not got this risk associated with that, of course. So I'm just wondering what you see the way forward on this as a chair, and what you would sort of advise we do.
I think the whole point, you know, we're all in this together again, but we need sources of assurance. You're 104, Janice will tell me the exact number. You're 140 million in turnover. In terms of risks, Anne-Marie, and we all know the level of risk here because it's safeguarding. You know, we're all corporate parents, and this is high up on our risk agenda, and we can't see, there's an absence of an assurance framework. We can't see it. And what's here is deficient, in my opinion. It was deficient back then, and we're now in month 11 again, and we haven't got an audit plan. I haven't seen an audit plan. There's no audits completed as of yet, so we're going to be presented with the same thing. So I think it's a basic approach that I expect to see in any organisation. What are your risks? You know, I couldn't see the risk register that was referred to in that report. What are the risks? What's the audit plan related to that risk? What resource have you got to deliver it? And what are the sources of assurance? Can we rely on them? We've got a contractual barrier and a corporate barrier between us and you, but we're accountable. We've delegated the responsibility to you, but we're accountable for it. And I don't care about those corporate barriers and contractual barriers. To me, they're irrelevant because we're all responsible. So I'd like to engage with you, work closely with you, and find out how do we get the assurance, because I think we haven't got it. I don't know if any members would agree or say against that. Yeah, I think we should look at the audit teams and the audit resources we've got. We've got a team. I don't know what the result. I can't speak for giving out resource from our side, but I think what I observe in this committee is we get good sources of assurance on the whole. You know, we find things, but we know where the risks are. We know where the weaknesses are, but I don't know what they are there. You know, they did an audit over payments to foster carers. Would do some. The risk assessment of that would be do an audit over fostering, because the risks are much higher. I don't care if they paid them a little bit more. We'll find out. That will be evident. There's budgetary controls to do things like that. It was even though it was all those audits, it was looking in the wrong places as well.
If I may, Chair, that very much echoes conversations I've had with Colin and Andrew. I think the approach we found from BDO and from the shared service internal audit team was that they often did look at lower level process-based audits. Not necessarily helpful, because as you say, all it does is tell you that a process works in moving something from A to B. It doesn't tell you if that process is actually effective. So what we've been working with Andrew and the team and talking to Rachel about is how we ensure that our audits are much more risk-based. So we look at where the key challenges facing the service are, and those are going to be around areas such as foster care recruitment. So we've got an audit at the moment, which we're just let me refer to my list. The audits we're looking at moving forward will be around, we had an audit in the plan around leaving care section 24, and that audit was very much around the process of making payments under section 24. We've pivoted that audit now to look at the effectiveness of those arrangements. When someone leaves care, how effective is what happens to them then, rather than just how effective are the payments. What that does mean is you're likely to get a lower number of audits, but those audits will hit the key risk areas. So what we're doing is very much looking at, as I say, the work BDO have done, because I need to understand exactly what they have done, both in terms of delivering the assurance they have delivered, but also the additional work they've done, so that I can then fill in those gaps. So the team at the moment are going through the working papers with a fine-tooth comb to see exactly what has been delivered. We have other audits underway already, which my internal team are doing. And this is why we brought the internal audit service back in-house. We did have an option to continue with BDO. We've chosen not to do that. It pushes my resource, but I think it's absolutely critical that whatever audits we do, I can stand behind. Now, I know from a committee perspective, I completely understand that that isn't the answer you want to hear. You want me to sit here and say, yeah, all the work BDO have done, absolutely brilliant, all fine, and the assurance is lovely. I can't do that without looking at their working papers, and I think it's important I'm honest with you on that. and I've had the same conversation with West Northants and the same conversation with Colin and Andrew, I need to be able to look at their working papers to understand what they have done in order to consider next steps.
That was quite candid there. So I think what's important is how BDO aren't here to answer that for their report, but they were engaged. I don't know what their engagement letter says. They will have one because they've got professional standards. What were they asked to deliver? How were they asked to deliver that? Because they said they weren't involved in the planning. So I'm a bit cautious about blaming BDO, because professional firms tend to do what they're asked to do in a scope memorandum or an audit engagement letter, and then they stick to that because they don't tend to go outside of it. So where did it all start? Who engaged them in the first place? And what were they asked to do? Because they're not a local firm who's not done anything before. They're a professional firm.
Yeah, happy to do the timeline. The audit programme was developed as part of the set-up of the trust, with the programme established in November 2020 for the programme to be delivered from April 21. That was then to be delivered by the lead commissioner model, which at the time was Milton Keynes. Due to a number of decisions that were taking place, the lead authority arrangement ended and BDO were commissioned through that lead authority to deliver the remaining elements of that programme. That commission took place in February 2022. So their entire remit and their entire engagement was to deliver the audits in that process. There was concerns that were shared, and then when Jen come on board, working with Jen around moving to a more thematic style and more working to a more process and moving away from some of these process audits that were put in place, and that's what we're developing now as part of the 22-23 programme.
I think 2021-22, that ship sailed. There's nothing we can do about it, and we've given our opinion on that. We do have a bit of ability over 22-23. I think what they ask, and I'll add to this as a committee, what we want is input, influence and visibility. We want to input, we want to share with you what we think the risks are. We want to be able to influence the audit programme, and we want visibility. We want to see how you're doing. We get very good reports about progress on internal audit. I want to see them as we're going along, because you're really important to us, really important to us. Even if you measure it in pound notes, it's really important, but it's more important than that because it's risks. So that's the ask. I don't know if there's comments from members if that would be sufficient, but I think that I'd be prepared to work with them, and I'm sure our internal audit team would.
One of the things we have implemented over the last couple of months is regular meetings with Rachel, myself and Andrew to talk through and give those updates on where we are in terms of audits being delivered, what audits we've got in the plan and where we are. And I think it's fair to say that Rachel provides a suitable level of challenge to that. But I'm very happy to come to committee as frequently as you see fit to call me in. Part of my job is to come and give you assurance. I'm sorry I haven't been able to do that today, but certainly moving forward with Rachel and Andrew, I'm very happy to attend and support that process.
Okay, thank you. That's a positive outcome. Is there anything else you'd like to raise in relation to this, or that you'd inform us of, as areas of concern you may have from what you've done in your audit so far? I know you've started a number of them. I don't know when they started, but...
I don't think there's anything specific to raise at this point. We are working through the audits in key areas. As I said, some of them have pivoted slightly to be more of a focus on outcomes and results rather than detailed process.
So when did they start? What date did they start, please?
I don't have detailed dates, I'm afraid. We've got one audit at the moment which is under field work and two which are in planning stage.
If you can just report back when they started, that'd be helpful after the meeting. I'd just look to members to see if there's any other points you'd like to raise or questions. Okay, so what we're being asked to do as a committee is note the contents of the report and attached appendices. I think we've got some concerns over them, but we can note them. So could I ask for a... Certainly, Michael, yes.
Please. Oh, sorry, thank you. I just had a quick question on the Care First and the social care transport. Those are the two that sort of were more alarming from my perspective. Was we seem to have hundreds, if not thousands, of people who can get hold of the data for quite sensitive individuals. What's the follow-up on that? I mean, it's been raised, and also, you know, as again, these are vulnerable people, and they're being transported by people that we don't even know who they are, because there's no audits or there are audits, but it's not complete. So, coming from my background is as a safeguarding governor at some of the local primary schools and junior schools, and those pupils are vulnerable, and the transport one is really alarming, because that's an issue that comes up quite a lot. But also, as I say, I was very surprised to hear that people still are able to log on to the systems when they've left the company and that kind of stuff. Can you just give me an update on that, to give some assurance that something's been done about it?
Yeah, thank you, and fair question. So, and there's a theme. So the audit process for NCT is a support service through the council, through the evolution of the three organisations, and the working together is really important, as is transport. So our transport services are delivered by North Northants and West Northants councils. So the safeguards that are in place in each council should give some assurance to that. What the point being made in the report is that that wasn't seen at the time of the audit. So I know there's some more work happening on that. In terms of Care First, there was an issue where a member of staff worked for another organisation and left a number of years ago and still retain their login. That was raised appropriately through the Information Commissioner's Office, and that was addressed immediately when that became apparent. So we, as far as we're aware, there's no other access. We check access to the system. Okay. That's not from outside of the organisation. The point about the Care First system, and the main risk about the Care First system, is that, you know, it was identified for all three organisations back in, well, initially in autumn 2020. Then again in spring 21, the system needs changing, and I'm pleased to say that working with North Northants and West Northants Council, that is finally going out to procurement imminently. The system is an old system, and you know, there needs to be an update. So it's taken a long time to get to the point of procurement. However, I'm pleased to say that is happening now. So it's that the point about us working together is there are so many dependencies through what's delivered through NCT due to the statutory direction from government and the support services from each councils, and that togetherness is really important. I hope that helps give some assurance.
Thank you for that. And sorry to go back, but it was a prompt to something that I forgot to raise. It was about the audit tracker, because the social care transport audit, for example, that received a low assurance rating, but there are no actions on the tracker. How can we have a low assurance and no recommendations?
So, just if I can respond, the tracker relates to the audits with the key officers from NCT. So it's a tracker on audits from NCT officers. The other tracker around the other audits delivered as the codependencies are on the internal update of the action plan, and we receive the updates on the actions from those as part of that business. That's cyber security, social care transport, and the Care First. That's why they're not included.
Right, okay, that answers the question why there's no cyber follow-up, because that was a low level of assurance as well. So, but obviously that probably wasn't evident. We should have explained what it is, because we don't want a partial tracker, we want the full thing.
It's the monitoring tracker for the actions of NCT officers, and we obviously, at the meetings, the regular meetings, we have the updates on the other audits that are reported through the various committees.
Okay, thank you.
If I just may, Chair, in terms of social care transport and touching on cyber, what we've started to do again within my team, where we do have a limited assurance audit, is I meet with the relevant manager on a regular basis with one of my team to establish, so rather than just having recommendations sit on a tracker or recommendations left with the business, where we have key findings and recommendations such as social care transport, we then meet with those managers on a regular basis. At the moment, I'm meeting with the manager from transport on a monthly basis to ensure that progress is being made in improving services, and we are seeing good progress with those. Similarly with cyber, I meet with the IT team to ensure that the work they are doing is meeting the immediate need, but also has a longer term focus to it. What you often find with these findings and trackers is recommendations may be put in place to solve the whole problem whilst there is an immediate need for action. So what we're trying to do is working with those operational teams is ensuring that underlying process is being tightened, but also that the door is being closed now, as it were. So we're working with the teams, and I meet with them on at least a monthly basis, usually more frequently to start with, to ensure that action is taken and moving forward. Apologies that isn't clear. I will make sure that in future you understand where things sit on which tracker, but also the underlying processes that happen to ensure things are moving forward.
I'd point you towards the follow-up process done in this council, because I think it's effective and it works well, and you can see we pick up things, and if things get delayed they get queried and challenged, and I think that's the way we should do things with follow-up. So I'd suggest we follow a similar process. That reminds me of one criticism that we made back in September was that there was no follow-up from the legacy. There was never any follow-up in that programme. So that's why we felt the whole plan was deficient, because you should follow up from the bad place from which it came. When it was, on an operational basis, it was rated as inadequate. So we knew there was loads of recommendations there. There was no follow-up of them. So my suggestion is that's taken on board as well, because there would have been a lot of recommendations there.
Just if I can, just come back. There was three audits that were outstanding from what we inherited. They related to transport, they related to foster care payments, and the last one related to complaints. The complaints was configured as part of the KPIs, and there's a specific KPI that's measured on there. Transport was picked up because of the significance, and picked up with a further audit that we've received this year, and the foster care payments and the debt recovery was addressed. What we have that sits alongside this, going from the inadequate place, is the service improvement and the reporting through the Social Care Improvement Board, and that picked up a significant number of actions that sat outside the audit programme, which is a key element of the assurance framework of the audit, which isn't within the framework of an internal audit programme. I don't know if Colin wants to add
anything. And that board is chaired by Department for Education and attended by appropriate officers from NCT and also both councils.
Okay, thank you. One point I also missed was our officer who's got overall responsibility for this as Director of Children's Services. Obviously, you need to get sources of assurance as well. So I think obviously you should be involved in that process. That probably went without saying. So I'd like you to be fully involved in that. I don't know if you've got any comments on how you feel about the way forward that we've kind of agreed there. Does that meet with your approval?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think that the way forward is the right way. I've certainly done a lot of work with Rachel on the rest of Children's Services, and I think Rachel's input and my oversight as well will be welcomed to provide appropriate assurance. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I'll go back now to the recommendation which is set out in the report. Is to note the contents of the report and attached appendices. Have a proposer for that, please, Councillor Level, and Councillor Pengelly seconding. All those in favour, please show. Yep. Against? Abstain? Thank you. Okay, I think that moves us on to any exempt items, of which there are none. And if I could formally close the meeting and take it off the YouTube stream. I'll just ask everybody just for give me a couple of seconds afterwards. I want to say a few things. And so are we off?